I'm going to continue my video series on Henry Ward Beecher and his sermons by talking about the perks of Christianity. What are those perks? One is getting a good night's rest. Let me tell you something. You could be in a Roman dungeon or even in a fallout shelter and still get a good night's rest. Why? Because you don't worry anymore. What you do is you place your worries in God's hands and let Him handle it. Okay? That's the way it works. Let me tell you something. Worrying will keep you busy, but it won't let you go where you need to go. Matter of fact, it will not take you anywhere. You just keep going around and around and around in a circle. And you don't want to go round and around and around in a circle. You put your worries in God's hands, and then He shows you the correct way to get out of it. Now, you may not see it right away, but He'll show you a way to get out of your mess. Okay? That's the way God is. And God surrounds you like a shield. As long as you're going God's way, God surrounds you like a shield. And when the enemy comes right at you, they hit God's shield instead. And believe me, they hurt pretty bad when they hit God's shield. That's just a given. But then, God also orders His angels to surround you. Just because you can't see them doesn't mean that they're not there. And they surround you and they protect you. And through God's orders, they show you a way to keep a roof over your head, to keep clothes on your back and food in your belly. Okay? And that's how that works. And the thing is, another perk is getting God's compassion. Let me tell you something. You can weather any storm as long as you got God's compassion. Because God's compassion guides your little boat right through the storm and right out the other side. Not everybody can say that. Now, they always say, well, you have to give up this for God, and you have to give up this for Christ, and so on and so forth. There's a lot of things you do not have to give up for Christ. If you're a singer, God wants you to continue singing. Okay? And not just in a church. If you're a good enough singer, you can still go on the road. And when you go on the road, well, on a Sunday, stop by a church. God's not really that concerned with you singing 6 nights a week. But what He wants you to do is to make sure that on that 7th day you show up at His house, no matter where it is. Because God has lots of houses all over the world. God owns a lot of real estate, let me tell you that. So if you're touring the countryside, singing for people in multiple venues, just take a moment, stop, go to a church that's nearby, and worship God there. See what I mean? Let me tell you something. If you're an architect, continue being an architect. But then also help design buildings for God. You can do that. If you're designing buildings for other people, you can design buildings for God too. And God blesses that. If you work in retail, show God's love and compassion in retail. You don't have to preach to the people. You just have to show the love and compassion of Christ to the people. And there are lots of ways to do that without bringing up Christianity. You don't have to do that. God doesn't want you to be a preacher while you're in retail. All He wants you to do is demonstrate His love. Big difference. And I could go on and on. Listen, you don't have to give up your house for Christ. You just have to make your you have to make your house a Christ-filled home. That's what I'm trying to say. When you buy clothes that demonstrate the love of Christ in them. You don't have to wear suits all the time. God never required that. See what I mean? Just make whatever you're doing and wherever you're going and so on and so forth, doing it for Christ. And that's when he starts giving you his blessings. And that's another perk of Christianity, is getting God's blessings. When you're getting God's blessings, you have nothing to worry about. Okay? Now here's another perk. Let's say that you are one of the teachers that God has employed. And remember, you don't necessarily have to just teach Christianity. I don't just teach Christianity here. I teach lots of stuff, but I also teach Christianity. See what I mean? But think about it. Paul's teachings speak to us today, even thousands of years after his demise. The same thing with John Calvin. The same thing with Henry Ward Beecher. These people have long since passed on. But their teachings continue to teach us to this day. Because God preserved all those teachings so that they can continue ministering even after the person who wrote them down was no longer with us. There were people that did sculptures and paintings for Christ. And those sculptures and those paintings still speak to us today because God specifically preserved them for that very purpose. Let's take the Dead Sea Scrolls. Think about that. The Essenes are no longer with us. But what they learned, what they taught is, because God preserved those Dead Sea Scrolls for 2,000 years. Deliberately. So those teachings can come to us to this day and age when we need them the most. I have a feeling that the teachings I'm giving you now will be preserved because God will make sure they're preserved for all of you. Shoot, one day in the far distant future, somebody may be watching me, and I may not even be here anymore. But my teaching will go on. God will never let that stop. Because I'm teaching what God wants me to teach you. That's another perk of Christianity. So, sounds like a good care package, don't you think? I think so. Alright. I will tell you more in a future video. Stay tuned.